I'm Cyndy Guerrero.
And I'm Tomas Guerrero.
And together we're bringing you voices from around the university
to talk about things that matter to you, our students.
This is RGVoces. For some more insight on today's topic, stay tuned after the first part of the podcast for a special interview with another voice from around the university. Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about where to go for extra help, okay? So we got several places across the university that can help you with our various projects and various things that you're working on in your classes. I'm just going to list them real quick, and then we're going to go into detail about them, okay? So we got the Writing Center, we got the Learning Assistance Center, we got other professors, we got advisors, we got the Hauser Lab, and we get the library. So, do you want to take it away with the Writing Center and what that is?
Sure. So, the Writing Center is exactly what it sounds like. It is a center for writing. Anyway, just left it at that.
No, the pause was me glaring at him.
Yes, that was a very vicious pause and very vicious glare. So, no, it is a place where you can go to on campus, and you can have them work with a sample of your writing or a piece of your writing. And usually it's about a 30-minute session where they can give you feedback. And from what I've seen, it's very beneficial if you go to them with a specific goal. So if you're at the very beginning of your draft, you know, go in and tell them, I need help developing my ideas. Here's where I currently stand.
Right.
Versus, like, let's say you're already at the end, all of your ideas are established and settled, you're ready to cure cancer. And then you tell them, I just need somebody to tell me what I misspelled or what grammar I messed up.
Right.
So there, you know, that final level of editing.
Right.
So yeah, so that's available to you. If you don't have time to go, but if you don't have time to go, they do have online submissions. Just keep in mind that depending on when you send your papers in, there may be a bit of a wait. So don't expect that you can submit it at 5 o'clock and then just be like, it's due at 7, so hurry up. That's going to be probably a no-go.
Right.
But so do give yourself enough time to actually go to the Writing Center or submit your stuff to the Writing Center and check out what kind of services they can do to kind of help you along with your writing.
Right. I believe it's located on the 3rd floor of the Stack building.
Yes, as of now.
Right. Okay. And that's the Annenberg location. And then in Brownsville, it should be located on the 3rd floor of the library.
Yeah.
And then we got the Learning Assistance Center, which is the place where the tutors live.
Yes.
And they stay there forever.
They live and they roam free, happily.
Yeah, but you can basically go there for any tutoring assistance that you need. So I believe you get one-on-one assistance from a tutor, right?
Yes.
Over your writing, or I believe they have even math tutors and science tutors.
They have all kinds of tutors.
Right. So that's a place you can go to if you're more of I need a one-on-one assistance with this subject, and could you please guide me along? Right. And it's really great. Smack dab in the middle of campus, I believe.
Yeah.
Kind of close to the library.
It's east of the library.
East of the library.
Yeah.
Okay.
So on the opposite side of the current construction.
So take your compass, go to the library, and there's also maps online. I'm sure you'll be able to find it pretty easily.
The cardinal directions are in my head.
I know.
Anyway, yeah.
And then over in Brownsville, their learning center is actually in the building, called Music, Science, and Learning Center.
Yeah, that's right.
All those. And it's in the front part of the campus kind of off to the right of the big main building in front.
Yep.
Then we got other professors.
Right. So one of the things that I constantly tell my students is, you know, once class is over, just because class is over doesn't mean that I stop existing. It just means I'll never talk to you again. No, it means the exact opposite. It means that I've become a permanent resource, or semi-permanent resource, so long as you can catch me, right? But I become a resource for you.
They have to hunt you like a Pokemon.
Yeah, they gotta pull out their phone and have to be like, "Where's Guerrero now?" No, but so if you ever are struggling in another class, and it doesn't even need to be English, if you need assistance with, you know, another class where you're writing something, I've had people come to me with their philosophy papers, I've had people come to me with science papers, all kinds of different subjects, and I'll try my best to kind of help you along. And of course, the network of the faculty we have here in the writing program, we're all very much open to the idea of assisting students. There are times where You know, I'm not a creative writer, or I don't have a degree in creative writing, but, you know, Miss Guerrero here does. So if a student comes to me and they're like, hey, I'm struggling to create this piece of fiction, I can try to help as much as possible, but then, you know, I want them to know that, you know, Miss Guerrero can also help them with that specific type of project.
Right.
And students have really come to find, like, we're an invaluable resource outside of just, you know, rhetoric and composition, although that is hopefully something you have questions about.
And the next helpful place is your advisors. You should have been assigned one when you registered at UTRGV. And they are helpful for things like scheduling and choosing a major and a minor and figuring out what classes you need to take for that.
Right.
And there's several ones. There's general advisors. There's advisors specific to a certain discipline. And so it's very useful to go find out who they are, where their office is located, and build a relationship with them so you can ask them any question that you need to successfully complete your degree and graduate on time.
Absolutely. Okay. What I would recommend for anybody that you come into contact with, take their email and save it somewhere useful, especially if you categorize, you know, like, oh, if I need help with writing, I should contact Mr. Guerrero or Mrs. Guerrero. Or if I need help with, you know, a specific type of subject, I should contact this tutor that I had at the Learning Assistance Center. Create that network somewhere on your phone. Take photos of our, you know, of our business cards, whatever it might be, and keep those with you. So if somebody were to ask, have you talked to your advisor lately? And you go, I don't even know who that is. At least, you know, hold on to their contact info. Right.
And next we have the Hauser Lab. That is the place where you can go to if you need help with presentations. You can actually physically go to their office and do your presentation in their office, and they'll record you, and they'll give you some general advice over how to make it more effective. I believe it's more like the physical aspects of the presentation, not so much the content of it, because they're not very familiar with the parameters of your assignment and how the class works and everything, but they can help you with your presentation skills, and that'll be useful for any sort of presentation you have. They're located actually right here in the eLabs building, the same place we're in, on the first floor. So they're very easy to find.
Just another thing to keep in mind, they also work with groups. So if you are doing a group project, it may be beneficial for all of you to schedule a meeting time so that you can go in, you have an opportunity to kind of play through your presentation, and then you can get active feedback so that when it comes time for class, you've got it handled. Right.
And the last one we want to talk about not least is the library, because it is not just the place where the books live.
They have those beanbags now too.
Yes, and people. We have awesome people that we work with specifically in the library that know what our goals are. They help us out with a lot of our projects. They run workshops with us. They help us order resources for our classes, books, articles, everything. They are great people. So if you ever need help with your research, they know what's up. And so you go to people like Carl Nelson or Andrew Porter or one of the new staff members, Charlie. Yes. They're all really, really great people, really helpful people. Yes.
And we have amazing staff both in the Edinburgh Library and the Brownsville Library, so you're never left wanting for, you know, extra help. Joel, yes, over in Brownsville. They're just ready and waiting to help you with whatever stage of your thing that you're doing. If you need help developing a research question, man, hunt them down, and they will help you jam out different ideas. Or if you need specific sources, they can help you find them. They can direct you to the books that you need. They're just amazing, wonderful people all over campus, ready and waiting to help you.
So these are just a handful of the places that you have available to you around campus. There's lots more places, but these are some of the main ones that we utilize in our program. And we just want you to be aware that these are places that you can build your network with. And what building a network means is just creating a group of people, a group of places that supports your learning, supports your growth, and that you can utilize for any stage of your academic career. Because it is all these places and these people, they are very helpful and very useful. So we highly encourage you to visit them constantly and build that relationship with them.
yeah, you're not just paying to take classes, you're paying for their services. And man, we're all just kind of waiting to help you with anything you might need. So come down, talk to us, talk to them. You know, if we can't help you, we can definitely find somebody who can.
Right. And as always, part of the network means that you can talk to us anytime via email or come visit us or ask your professors for help as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Hi, this is Tomas and Cyndy. We're here with Dr. Randall Monty. Do you want to talk to us, Monty, a bit about, or sorry, Dr. Monty, a bit about, I get informal, a bit about networks and citations?
Sure. So, my interest in working with, or the work that got me into this line of inquiry of working with citations and network theories had stemmed from teaching English 1302, which is a class that that y'all have taught as well, and specifically looking at one of the learning outcomes related to that course having to do with writing from scholarly sources, and particularly trying to isolate or at least respond to the concern not just within our own program but across the disciplines at our institution, across the different programs, this concern that students generally is framed as don't know how to use academic sources.
Right.
And so the 1302 specifically is designed not just at our institution, but I believe also within the UT system as sort of to address that particular need and to prepare students for that sort of work for later on. Now, obviously, we can talk about how that ignores specific disciplinary expectations of citation practices, although I do think that 1302 instructors tend to encourage students to do their work within a disciplinary situatedness that allows them to learn how to enact citation practices relative to their own disciplines. I mean, there's value in that. It might not. I mean, it does kind of require the instructor or student to have a deeper understanding of those citation practices, which can cause trouble. I might be sort of leading us towards an argument of why we need application writing courses. That's not what we want. But in terms of, for the class itself, I was investigating different ways to get students to think about what it means to do secondary research in terms of, we use metaphors like entering a conversation,
Right.
or identifying or filling a gap within the scholarship. But if you don't know what scholarship is, identifying the gap within the scholarship can probably be pretty difficult, or even what we mean by gap.
Right.
I think for a lot of students and for a lot of professionals, it seems, let's say, presumptuous to assume that we're able to recognize what someone else is missing from the work they're doing. And so, although that is language that's used across sort of scholarly research. So when we look at network theory, and this isn't something I developed by any stretch, but it's an idea of looking at citations and citation practices, and to a larger extent scholarly writing, as a way for writers to allows us to enter into those sorts of academic conversations, whatever topic they happen to be researching on.
Right.
So if we think of in terms of networks, it's not that when they're trying to come up with scholarship when students are trying to do research that allows them to fill in a perceived gap in the scholarship, they're putting their own work in response to, in conversation with, in contrast with other scholarship that's already been done there.
Right.
And so when we think of in terms of networks, we're focusing not just on what their idea is or what the other scholars or researchers' ideas were, but how these works function in relationship to each other.
Right. It's pretty complex. So our goal for this podcast too is to have conversations with each other and then have students in on these conversations too. So I think that might help. Would you be able to maybe give us a definition of scholarship from your own perspective, so maybe our students can get a good understanding of that.
And reflect on that.
Oh, so what I mean when I say scholarship?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess scholarship, that's a good question. I don't know if I've never thought of it strictly in sort of denotative terms in that sense.
It's tough.
I should be able to, right?
Yeah.
So I guess what separates, so here's how I would define that. I would look at scholarship as what separates it from other sorts of writing or religious discourse that we're open to, that we come in contact with. And I think because other types of writing, whether it be creative writing, news media, social media writing, there are thoughtful and sincere approaches to this as well. So I think this is why this understanding citation practices and references are so important to scholarly writing, because that's what makes it scholarly writing, is you are specifically, as a writer, trying to understand as much as you can about a particular topic in a very discrete way in order to make a likewise good faith and discrete response to that thing.
Right.
So we're not, when we're doing scholarly writing, we want to follow, I used the term inquiry before, because inquiry, ideally, I guess if we do it effectively, allows us to try to move towards some new understanding of some given topic. There's an epistemological process to scholarship that isn't necessarily present in everything else. Well, this isn't to say other forms of writing can't function epistemologically, but I don't know if that's necessarily the telos or the main objective of those other types of writing.
Right.
So like reporting on an event that happened can provide us with information about something, new information. But I don't know if necessarily, if even the best reporting is explicitly trying to help people develop a new way of understanding or thinking about or thinking through something.
Right.
A reason why we can use this scholarship or use these sorts of scholarly citation practices rather is it allows us to make the most detailed and best types of arguments we can.
Right.
We're making more informed claims about the work we're doing.
Right. And that's why an understanding of citations is so important.
Well, I think that's the thing. Like focusing on the citations is sort of a surface level way of thinking about it. Perhaps that's why I think the network concept is valuable. In particular, Derek Mueller's concept of work net theory, which builds off of concepts of equal composition and Bruin Latour's theories, and then you sort of get in your ideas of posthumanism and new materialism, which kind of stretches outside of first year writing. But the idea of a work net as looking at different ways that ideas are connected and where ideas come from. And now that I'm on the spot, I'm going to forget all four of them, but this is bibliographic, semantic, choric, and there's one other one that I'll have to look up for it. But the so I'll stop, you guys can edit out.
No worries.
Oh no, we're keeping it in.
There's going to be a special blooper.
I'm trying to do that on purpose, like pausing to
to rethink and everything.
Make it a little bit easier to
tough
do.
stuff.
Take your time. Okay. So Derek Mueller, in his article for Composition Forum, Mapping the Resourcefulness of Sources, a WorkNet Pedagogy, talks about 4 different ways that citations work. One of them is semantic. Semantic has to do with vocabulary. This can be explicit if you use a particular term, particular way, because you want your readers to know that you're invoking a certain school of thought or a certain meaning for this particular term.
Right.
So like when you asked me earlier what scholarship meant, if I had a better prepared answer, I could give you a very specific thing that had a semantic tie to some other line of scholarship. In the vocabulary we use, aligns us with certain discourse communities, aligns us with certain disciplines.
Right.
And so we can look at how our ideas are semantically connected to one another. And those should also be reflected in what we're citing.
Right.
But again, it starts with the understanding it as this network. The language we use, the vocabulary we use, places us within a larger network.
Right.
And that gets reflected in citation practices.
It's true.
The next idea looks at bibliographic. This refers specifically to what you're citing or referencing in your work as well. Moving on quickly, affinity-based. This is where it starts to move to more abstract concepts that my students have a little more fun with. The idea of what are the other human connections that you have with the work that you're doing.
Right.
So the fact that the three of us all work in the same writing program creates an affinity-based network within that. But it also connects you to, say, people I work with on other programs, or other programs or other projects that you work with other people in the institution or other institutions.
Right.
We see these things manifest, for instance, in, we think of like the way a workplace, sort of like if you're networking.
Right.
If you're networking in that sort of workplace context, then an affinity-based work net citation makes a little bit more sense that way.
That's true.
But we can also look at it in terms of seeing who people studied with and see how that forms the work we're doing.
Right.
At our writing program, invention is a significant consideration for how we teach the writing process.
That's true.
And it's embedded within the course designs, it's embedded with the student learning outcomes. It's not a coincidence that the people at our institution who developed the writing program as it stands now studied at an institution where one of the faculty members was basically like the creator of this concept of invention or reintroducer of concepts. Speaking specifically of Janice Lauer.
Oh yeah.
Right. As someone writing one invention. These things relate to each other. And so understanding where this information comes from removes us from thinking that the students and us from thinking that just because this is on the syllabus, that's why it's important. No, well, let's understand where it actually came from and how it got there and what impacts
how it developed.
Right.
The fourth one that Mueller talks about is the concept of core citation. And this is the best way I can think of it like this. We see this in like music studies, for instance, where if you're studying for a math exam and you're listening to, you listen to, Stravinsky while you're studying. You're supposed to listen to Stravinsky as you're walking to take the math test too, because it sticks in your head and it creates this sort of mnemonic for you to recall that same information.
Right.
But there's also other things going on at the same time that can connect us to people. And I'll give you a very, very specific example. A friend of mine, actually another parent from my daughter's soccer club, we were out, the four of us, me, him, and our kids were out at lunch the other day, and he mentioned that he was a fan of Notre Dame football. And so I mentioned that one of my favorite moments as a kid watching sports was watching Boston College beat Notre Dame on a field goal. And he knew exactly what I was talking about. Because while me and my brother were running around the house yelling, he and his brother were in the house crying because Notre Dame just lost. And so our daughters were kind of couldn't understand. It took them a minute. Once they realized what was going on, they were kind of amazed by this fact, like, their dads who grew up on completely different sides of the country had this shared mutual experience that informed sort of not only their own identities, but revealed the sort of networked connection that exists beyond things we might realize. So these things that go on in the world outside of what you're doing. Right. When I talk about more overtly political concepts within my class, we can't really have conversations without thinking in terms of the political moment that we're in right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right now I'm reading a book called Faking the News, edited by Ryan Scannell, subtitled What Rhetoric Can Teach Us About Donald J. Trump. And it's a series of essays about they do involve critique, but they're mostly about examining the rhetorical strategies of how the particular political moment works. And so whether you're explicitly trying to make a political theme to your writing course, your students are writing, in the year 2019,
right.
At this university within the country there are going to be sort of political core connections that they're going to be making to the work they're doing.
Right.
We have students who are also thinking about whether or not DACA is going to be repealed. Like that's a very real, a felt experience for a number of our students at UTRGV. And so even if that's not something explicitly we're talking about in our writing, it is something that could be impacting the work and the writing that they're doing.
For sure.
Yeah. I know I had a student who was looking at the situation going on in the NFL with, players taking a knee during the
National anthem.
And he couldn't figure out why that was an appropriate moment for them to do that. He said, I support them, doing what they're doing, but not there. Like, why does it have to be there? And he couldn't contextualize that concept, and it was kind of revealing the way his mentality works and like his experiences and how he was trying to shape it in his own mind to try to come up with his own understanding. So even though that wasn't necessarily something like, oh, go figure out something controversial to look at or something that's kind of impacting you in some way, and he decided to take that moment and try to figure it out for himself. And I do notice that a lot of the ways they talk about very impactful stuff does revolve around what's going on right now, either on a personal level or on a political level. Like, these things come in, and I forget sometimes that they've lived very different experiences. Sure. Like when they asked me on the last 9/11 anniversary, sir, what was it like? And I forget that some of them might not even have been born at that
Sure.
time. So when I spoke to them about it, they looked at me like I was revealing a whole new world that was invisible to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think with the example of the NFL players protesting the police brutality against African Americans in the United States, that's ripe for a conversation about Kairos, which is very much undergirding the work we're doing
Right.
as writing instructors. But the argument of that's not the time for it is something that historically has turned up whenever some hegemonic interest wants to quash some sort of counter narrative or critique.
Right.
They'll claim that's not the appropriate time for it.
Right.
Now, what always gets unsaid is what would be the right time for it.
And I would ask them to him too, and he really couldn't answer. It's like, well, some of the time it's like that's not a poignant time to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of, we see this also with the gun violence in the United States.
Yeah.
It's never the right time to talk about the thing. But from a perspective of Kairos or of exigency, like, that is exactly the right time to talk about things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, Dr. Monty, you're a very big proponent for the Writing Center. It's one of the things that we as 1301 and 1302 teachers, we always encourage our students, go to the Writing Center, go to the Writing Center. There's always this bit of hesitation for them to go. As someone who's in your position, could you tell us about your position and, maybe talk to our students a little bit about why you as somebody would encourage them to go?
Because I want to know what they're working on. I like talking with people about their work.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not, necessarily. That's what got me interested in working with writing centers in the first place, or really held me on to it, is this idea that I could be of value to somebody else by talking with them and working with them on something they were actually interested in doing.
Right.
And so the Writing Center, I think, can reflect or recreate or create, maybe for the first time for some folks, what for many is just a good practice of writers. The hashing out your ideas with other people. We've talked quite a bit about collaboration, about the social epistemology, sort of the collective construction of ideas in meaning making within our classes. And so the Writing Center is specifically designed for that, for you to work sometimes with one other person, sometimes with a group of other people, to get a perspective from outside your own head, outside from your own class. And the tutors, almost to a person, in my experience, working across a few different institutions, are genuinely interested in wanting to know what the other students are working on.
Right.
I think there's practical reasons as well. The tutors are trained on how to respond to students working on their writing across a number of disciplines. The tutors at the Writing Center read more assignment descriptions and rubrics than anybody else on campus.
True. Yeah.
They have a better sense, even better than the administration of the Writing Center, of what expectations for writing are across the institution.
Right.
Right.
And so they're able to help students situate the work they're doing within not just the disciplinary expectations of the course they're taking, but within the larger work they're doing in an institution as well.
Right.
Right.
So I think that's the practical value to it as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it feels very, very helpful because usually we have at the most 2 hours and 30 minutes with our students a given week, and sometimes not even that if it's reduced seating. And it feels like this work that we're doing with our students can keep going even if we're not with them at all times, and they can keep being engaged in this work that we're trying to do with them at a different location.
So like thinking of your work as not something that's strictly done just in your class.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as a thing that is impacting maybe your life outside of class as well, but something that I think for students who are attending an institution like ours, they understand that their schoolwork plays an important role of who they are now, what they want to become later on.
Right.
And so, let's say, years from now, you buy a house, you want to put a garden in. You don't know how to, till the land so you can plant the plants that you want to put in your backyard. Spending a half an hour to learn how to do that is a pretty good investment in the long term. And so the Writing Center they do want to help you like with the individual paper you're working on, but it's also about developing skills that you can use later on and continue to use later on.
Right.
And in fact, reproduced studies throughout the history of Writing Center scholarship have looked at when students regularly visit the Writing Center, their grades go up in writing classes.
Right.
They do better, not because they get necessarily that one paper they bring in, they get a better grade on, although that can happen, but because they learn habitual practice of how to be a more thoughtful and effective writer.
Right.
More considerate of their own work, what thinking they're doing. And that's what ends up having a positive effect on students.
Right.
The idea of practice as rhetorically constitutive is, referring back to our idea of networked, for instance, and sort of material ideas, but the part of being a student is doing the things of students. Like you can be a student who only, so what would the bare minimum of being a student be? Like you submit things the day they're due, but that's part of it. Students are assessed on that, but students are also, or perhaps should be assessed on and are expected to do things like talk in class or in online discussions. They're expected to stay engaged and interested in their topics outside of what their assigned readings are. They're expected to talk with their peers to find out what's going on. They're expected to attend social events on campus or to meet outside of class with their peers at a coffee shop. There's a lot of these things that people do that sort of ontologically situate themselves as students. And so the Writing Center is that place where people learn how to do some of those things.
Right.
Through a practice.
Right.
And so the initial part is that service aspect of it, but when a Writing Center works and when students use it most effectively is when it leads into that sort of transfer of skills that they're doing later on.
Right.
One thing I can't not mention about it as well is like the library, the Writing Center is they're the two most socialist organizations on campus, I think. Like you go there and you talk with someone about your work, they help you with your homework and it's free.
Yeah.
Or at least you've already paid for it through your tuition. Through
Right.
your
You don't feel it.
there's no point of purchase cost.
Right.
But I think that's embedded within many strands of Writing Center scholarship, and I think many people who work within Writing Centers and Writing Center studies. It's the idea that understanding that knowledge is by definition communally constructed.
Yeah.
Right.
And so making material a space where that can be done,
Right.
I think can only benefit people doing that sort of writing work.
Right.
For sure. And I think it's really helpful to them, too, to not feel so alone and isolated in their own work and feeling like they have to get it done all by themselves successfully, otherwise they're a failure.
So those sort of outside stresses are certainly there.
Yeah.
I'm going to pump the brakes a little before I get into the idea that writing centers are necessarily this always welcoming and safe space, because people can be just as intimidated there as they could be anywhere else.
That's very true.
Right.
Also depends on the people who work there and the people
Sure.
who run it and different
and even
institutions.
who happens to be there the day you show up.
Right.
And so but we try to do things with the Writing Center to make this ethos that we're referring to make it even real in other ways. For instance, each semester we do a civic writing workshop where we invite members of the community or other faculty to come to the center, into the physical center, so people outside the institution as well, to come talk to us about sort of writing work they're doing. So we've had, grant writers from the city of Brownsville come talk to us about writing public grants. We've had researchers from the Writing Legislators Department who study incarceration to do workshops on writing for and to incarcerated persons. We've done workshops on how to respond to campus violence in writing. So there's been a number of ways that we've been able to take these sort of political exigencies that are overriding much of the work we're doing within institutions as writing instructors and directly try to address them. And those are things that the tutors themselves came up with. They wanted to have a more direct response to the political moment.
Right.
And sort of say, how can we leverage our skills as writing tutors or as writing center people, as writing faculty, in ways that can have broader positive impacts on the societies that we're working with.
Right,
Amazing.
absolutely. I do, as a minor note, one of the things that I tell my students is the things that we have you go do, they're not just activities or things to get a grade, that we're trying to help them kind of see these social things being as part of their learning. And I tell them all the cool stuff I do in class, I didn't just think of it one day. I didn't wake up and said, let's do this. It's through talking with my coworkers and trying to figure these things out and trying to figure out what's most effective, and through process of trials and trying to figure all that out, that's where all of these things come from. So you get to see some of the end result, and sometimes you end up being the middling practice group, but ultimately it's through conversation and through these social moments that's where a lot of my knowledge comes from.
And I'm thinking contemporarily, as institutions of higher education are, now I forget exactly which law it was. It wasn't I'm blanking on. There's particular legislation passed in the United States that situates higher education as it should be geared towards meeting specific public needs.
Right.
And so disciplines like the health sciences, disciplines like material sciences, education, those disciplines and those fields within them tend to almost have an embedded logic in how that works.
Right.
Like if you're an economics major, because of our cultural context, no one's going to ask you what you're going to do with that degree.
Right.
They just assume there's a need for it. But with the humanities, we're sort of engrossed in a moment where we're required to stake out that territory in slightly different ways. And so as writing instructors, part of the reason I think we bring in these outside topics or make these connections to social life or to popular culture isn't just a way to respond to things, but also help understand how the particular skills that people are learning within writing classes and within rhetoric classes, understanding how those things can be useful in the outside world.
Right.
For sure.
And that's one of the other things we wanted to talk to you about, which is that, transferring these things that we do in our classes into something that's more impactful. And one of the things you wanted to mention was the concept of social justice research.
Sure. So that's a sticky topic, I think, for a number of the students, partially because the idea of social justice is kind of getting a number of sort of straw man connotations attached to it through its use within popular culture.
Yeah.
Right.
And so when I think of social justice, I'm borrowing from, or not borrowing, I'm scaffolding directly off of Barbara Applebaum, who's an education professor, I believe, at Syracuse University. And her idea of social justice pedagogy, which itself builds off of the ones you'd expect, like Paulo Freire and those ideas, and his ideas. But when Applebaum uses social justice in her classes, She's talking about this idea of how the work we're doing is directly challenging hegemonic structures of oppression as they manifest themselves within the classroom. Cheryl Glenn's work with Silence of Rhetoric, Norman Fairclaw's work with critical discourse analysis are related to these ideas. But Applebaum is a proponent of specific pedagogical and classroom management strategies that can promote a certain level of social justice. And so let me give you a specific example of how we're talking about it. It's okay for people to disagree in class, to have political disagreements. And the class should be allowed to have those conversations. But if the classroom space itself is designed such in a way so that the dominant hegemonic ideology of the particular culture in which you're operating in is the one that's most being reproduced in your class, well, then you're not really promoting anything that's socially just. If the design of your classroom or the way you're assessing assignments are reproducing traditional power imbalances, then you're not really doing anything just.
Right.
But at the same time, so how do you do that, right?
Right.
So how do you set up a classroom where you allow people to have different opinions, but you're not just reproducing harmful or racist or sexist or otherwise bigoted ideologies within your classroom?
Right.
How do you do that? Like, how do you tell someone they can't share a particular opinion? So having a pedagogy of social justice sort of gives you a baseline for thinking through what are the sort of things that sort of are permissible and to what extent the challenges against what you want to talk about in class are allowed.
Right.
So if we were to talk, for instance, about language use in the classroom, there is an opinion out there that students in a writing classroom, in a first-year writing classroom, should only write or speak to each other in English. And so we can talk about why that exists. That's relevant to a writing class.
Yeah.
We can talk about how the arguments for that ideology are rhetorically constructed. That's relevant to a writing class, I think. But we might be able to pause the conversation before it gets to specifically criticizing people who speak more than one language for the fact of using their language. And it's a difficult thing to work through.
Yeah.
It's the idea, so I guess like the inverse example we see a lot in popular news media is this trope going around currently that being called a racist or being outed as a racist is somehow more damaging and more offensive than the actual effects that people feel due to structural racism.
Right.
Which is a curious position to take. It's nearly unfalsifiable, which isn't a very useful line of argument for thoughtful conversation within a college class.
Yeah.
But it is something pervasive, and it is something that informs people's worldviews because they're being inundated through media, through echo chambers of social media, through any other groups they happen to belong to.
Right.
And so how do you address something like that? Is it okay to say something racist in a classroom? Is it okay to use racist language when talking about certain groups of people because the classroom is supposed to be accommodating to all viewpoints? Well, again, from a social justice pedagogy perspective, we want to be, everyone should be allowed to have a perspective in class, but we can also recognize that not every perspective is as valued as it as some people want to think they are.
Yeah.
And so again, so how do we differentiate this?
Right.
And so what social justice pedagogy tells us, it looks at says your sort of dividing line is it reproducing a hegemonic ideology that is harmful to other groups of people?
Mm-hmm.
If it is, that's less useful for the purposes of the class that we're doing.
Right, right.
Okay.
And it's a tough line to walk, too, and to explain to them in a way that doesn't make them think, well, if I have a differing opinion, say I'm the only Republican in a group of Democrats, then I'm the harmful one and I'm wrong. Like, no, it's not that. It's not wrong to have any sort of ideology. It's just we want to make sure that our ideology doesn't harm anybody else, and that's...
And then you also have to think about the concept of how embedded some of their beliefs are.
Right.
Like, they can't even come to fathom the idea that something that they've always believed in is potentially...
Sure.
Like, I'm not trying to impress anybody. I just happen to believe all these things. And it's like, well, you know, let's... It's sometimes almost... I guess as an instructor, kind of worrisome, because to an extent you kind of want to be like, look at all this evidence, but we get worried about cognitive dissonance kicking in, you know, potentially them not really trying to pull anything out of it, or worse, they feel offended in some way, and it's like, well, our goal is not to offend either.
Or isolate.
But it can be. Like, offending someone because they hold harmful viewpoints, you know, maybe isn't the worst thing in the world necessarily.
Right.
But it takes savvy work to be able to conduct a class in a certain way so that someone can be offended by something going in class, but want to stick around.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, so it's not something that would go in and say, like, you know, everyone you disagree with, make a list of things that are okay to say and things that aren't okay to say, and stick with them the whole semester. Allow yourself to negotiate some of those terms as well, but having students interrogate their own belief systems can be a really effective way for doing it. A particular strategy that's stemming from this line of pedagogy involves students coming up with sort of counterexamples for their own belief systems.
Oh, yeah.
So they want to make a particular argument, but a particular policy argument, for instance.
Right.
A strategy I like to enact, and I gained this from various readings, from other faculty I've worked with. So it's not my own invention. But ask somebody, and this kind of works in regular conversation as well. And you ask someone, Thomas wants to tell us that, like, Montreal bagels are the best bagels in the world. I mean, that's, I think, verifiably false. But he could tell us that. But if you wanted to write a paper about why that was the case, I'd ask you, what is the best argument against Montreal bagels that you could recognize?
Right. And then he just throws bagels.
If you can't even come up with one, then you're probably approaching this topic from a more like zealotous or ideological perspective than you are from one of actual inquiry.
Right.
And again, when you're meeting in your church of the Montreal bagel, that's fine. But in the classroom, we'd want to approach things to try to understand a new way of thinking of things, going back to the idea of why we're doing this scholarship at all. Right. And so being able to understand, it's not setting up a pro-con, it's not setting up a false dichotomy, but it's almost a self-test to see, like, is this something that I can actually think through. Right. And it's tough.
It is.
It is really, really tough.
It is.
For some issues, for
yeah. One of the activities I have my students do is I have them come up with antithetical statements for each other. So even if they agree with the topic that the person is presenting them, they have to come up with some sort of antithetical statement to be the hostile audience. And they have a tough time sometimes, especially if it's some sort of social justice issue that they feel that is good, like somebody's against institutional educational inequalities, and they have to provide that counter argument, and it gets tough for them. But I'm like, you know what? We have to practice this. We have to challenge each other to think of every single perspective and be able to come up with counter arguments for ourselves and consider these other perspectives to understand them and understand our own better.
I think we could find evidence to support those counterexamples. Like, so tie them to particular sources, but tie them to particular lines of argument that actually exist in the world, rather than just construct some hypothetical that we're going to dismiss as soon as we
right.
Sentence.
Right.
Yeah, we do set it up that way so that it's not like you can't just be like, No, I disagree.
Right,
Like, you
yeah.
have to, like, not just say a line of arguing against it, but give, like, at least some kind of support or basis on that. But I think maybe adding on that, find a source that actually says this.
Yeah, that would be good too.
Yeah.
And on the logical side, it does give them more material for their research paper too.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, and they have fun with it because it's a challenge, and they're like, "Miss, please, no, I don't want to disagree. Like, we have to step outside of ourselves, guys. Consider other audiences."
Yeah.
And they have a good time.
Yeah, I think it's easy to say, well, consider other audiences. And they're like, yeah, we'll do that. And then we put them in a situation where they have to. It's like,
No, they're just dumb.
exactly.
But we don't necessarily. I think we tend to think in terms of like this pro-con approach to the work we're doing.
Yeah.
And the network approach is the way I try to get my students to hopefully help me think through it, rather than think of things on sort of a political binary.
Mm-hmm.
It allows us to visualize and to map out how our ideas function within a three-dimensional space. And so, if we were to map the three of ours political ideologies, right? Like I might be, far to the left of the two of y'all. Maybe Cyndy's right in the middle. Maybe Tomas is the balancing point on the far right.
Yeah.
Just whatever right and left you want to call those things. That's a way to think about it.
Right.
But for one, it removes a whole lot of agency for Cyndy because it kind of places you as just sort of responding to these sort of polar opposites.
Right.
And it doesn't really look for any potential areas where, like, Tomas and I might agree in the area, or disagree in a particular way that isn't represented by what you're talking about,
Right.
Cyndy. And so just triangulating that as a visual metaphor allows us to find some other space in there.
Right.
So if you kind of picture like a pyramid with the three nodes in the corners, and you sort of graft ideas within that space to get an understanding of where they are. And then for me, when I'm analyzing my own work in that way, and I invite my students to analyze their own work in that way, it allows us to see if there's things that are falling outside the parameters of our own arguments.
Right.
If that's something we want to include in the current argument we're working on, or do we need to reshape the argument in a way that incorporates the concepts as well.
Right.
While it sort of allows us to bring in these sort of counter ideas without relying on sort of pro-con structure.
Right.
So kind of pushing them beyond that easy mentality of like, oh, this is one opposing side, this is another opposing side.
Well, it provides a different way of thinking through it than they're probably used to. And that the reason that polarity is probably easy is because it's probably ingrained with them.
Yeah.
Through most of their ways of thinking about things.
Right.
And maybe in some instances, maybe that is the case. Maybe there may exist issues where, it's an either-or situation.
Right.
Again, those sorts, that approach to thinking, I believe, is less helpful, less conducive to doing thoughtful scholarly inquiry.
Right.
Which is, if that's the purpose of what we're doing here in our writing classes and institution, then we should look for models that allow people to think beyond those.
For sure. And not make them feel like they have to shy away from these tough conversations just because there's no easy answer. So that's sometimes their instinct to be like, I just won't talk about it, so I won't offend. Or I won't.
Right.
Yeah, and I tell them, we don't want that. We want to be able to practice these rhetorical conversations.
Why do you tell your student, why when the students ask why they want to be able to do that? Because some people just want to get along to get along.
Right.
So what do we tell our students when they question, because the thing I've been concerned with more discreetly in the last year or so in my work is, do my students want to have this overtly political conversation in the class? Going back to your example, Thomas, about the idea of like a student critiquing like Colin Kaepernick for protesting police brutality at an NFL game. Like, is the classroom the time, place, and manner for which we should have these political conversations? I think it's pretty clear. I think it is. But how do I explain it to my students?
Right.
How do I, as like a heterosexual, gender-confirming white dude of reasonable means who speaks predominantly English, tell a bunch of students who in various ways might be marked as the other within our country that they should be doing things that are politically active?
Right.
Like, I know that because of the body I have, I can get away with doing things that are politically active in a way that would be less deleterious long-term harms as some other people would.
Right.
And so maybe I need to think about how use my class, use my relative positions of authority or power as ways to allow other people to create space for people to do those things.
Yeah.
you all worked with me on, we all worked together on the recent National Conference on Peer Driven Writing. A lot of that was about creating space for people to have those sort of conversations.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It was very poignant fact.
Yes.
Like, we made it explicit.
Yeah.
Right? Like, maybe all academic work can be that way in some level, maybe. But do we make it explicitly as a thing students are doing?
Right. Hoi.
Big conversation.
Yeah, I know. I just told him because I said so just do it. No. No, I try to point out that if we shy away from these tough conversations, then nothing will ever change for the good in those areas. And it may be tough, and it may have some consequences. We just have to weigh if the change is worth the consequences in the long term, I guess.
But we know that.
Tough. Yeah.
We're not in the business of predicting the future.
Yeah, I know. That's why it's tough.
So I mean, it's difficult. That's why I think making explicit what theory are informing your pedagogical approaches allow you to do that. We have faculty within our writing program who embrace ideas of environmental justice, who embrace concepts of language difference, and those belief systems aren't topics that are used for a class. They're interwoven within their personal beliefs. They're interwoven with their own research and scholarship that they're doing, with their own activisms. And one of the things that scholarship can do, maybe, and one of the things that academy can do, maybe, is kind of give each other the benefit of the doubt for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume that you're acting in good faith in the argument you're going to be making. Assume I'm acting in the good faith in the argument I'm making, and then we can determine what sort of conversation we're going to have, or we're going to go for it.
Right.
That's not necessarily a mutually respectful approach that we see replicated in the political sphere or in social media.
Yeah. Either way, I think it's very helpful, this conversation that we're having for students, for them to see that even we struggle to come to terms with some things and figure things out.
Absolutely.
How do your students respond? Like, when they see that sort of uncertainty that you're expressing, how do your students respond to seeing like that their instructor isn't completely 100% sure what they're doing?
I think it makes them more comfortable with me in some terms. It depends on the student too, because I can't speak for every student.
Right.
But some of them feel more comfortable with sharing their own uncertainties and their doubts about themselves, and we can just have this conversation as, I guess, more equals. If some of them feel that I'm at a power position that is above them, then it maybe brings...
But you are.
Yeah, which I am. And I have control over like their grades and everything. But I think maybe that is not completely forgotten, but I guess it's more of a, like, I can still work within that and talk to her more honestly.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think it's helpful in a way.
Yeah, I've had a lot of students who will be wrapping up an assignment and they just throw a question out at me, and I go, you know what, I don't know everything about that, but let me look it up. And I'll spend time with them just chatting away different things that they think about, and I'll mention things that I think about, and we'll look up stuff and different frameworks of that same conversation. By the end of the thing, they're kind of more adjusted to the idea of like, it's not this one person who knows everything. It's this person who's trying to teach us these skills that he works with us. And it becomes more of an open environment. And I think because of that type of space that we create, they're more willing to come back and be like, okay, so I can believe something that's totally weird, but as long as we can work through it, it's not a big deal.
But you're also modeling that sort of habitual practice of academic work in a positive way. You don't know something, you go try to figure it out.
Yeah.
You don't make up some answer.
I tell them that's the worst thing I could do, is just to pull something out of my butt and pretend like it's the absolute truth. Because, 3 of you might go home today and just believe utter nonsense just because I said it, which is why I'm incredibly careful with the way I talk to you guys and what I say to you guys.
Which, I mean, you may be slightly overestimating your impact on the students.
That's why I said 3, man. 3 out of 150.
Okay.
Good,
You're thinking the whole number of classes.
I wasn't thinking 3 and 5.
But even if they don't explicitly say, I believe this because my instructor said this in class, this is something, again, that we work, sort of grapple with in the Writing Center as well. we are representatives of the university, of the
Yep.
institution, and of sort of like the power there that's represented through the institution. And so we can see this in the legal context, right? We've heard about college professors who get in trouble, so and so, you know, within political or news media for teaching a class, for making a statement that certain people might not really agree with.
Right.
With the underlying concept being that you are a representative of the entire institution.
Right.
Given the institution we work at, you're a representative of the entire state.
Right.
Right.
So there are a confluence of factors to consider.
Yeah. You still have to
Absolutely.
maintain that balance of authority and still be that person that they can rely on, but also be empathetic and approachable, and it's just a fine line to walk, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, depends on the student, depends on the class. Oh, it's all kinds of different factors.
Yep. All right. Well, it's a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Dr. Monty, for agreeing to talk to us and
Yay.
share
Yay.
your brilliance.
Well,
Is there any final thoughts you want to leave our students with? Aside from which bagels are best?
Those bagels are gross.
they're not bad. If you like,
Not good
you
stuff.
like really crispy bagels, that can't hold any other content. I guess bagels are fine.
It's going to be a controversial
They're not
point.
made with water from the East River.
Oh.
Good bagel. Something to leave the students with. I think the idea, like using this space, the classroom space, as a way to try your ideas. Like we use a laboratory metaphor for a number of reasons. You see laboratory metaphor shows up in writing centers historically as well.
Yep.
We have like a writing studio metaphor that we use within our own program.
Okay.
And these ideas that where you're going to work to create something. But so what is it you're creating? That's what we got to work towards. I think maybe you're creating new ways or different ways of thinking about or thinking through or responding to different problems or different ideas or different concepts. And so using those metaphors of lab and studio, think of your classroom as a place to do that sort of exploratory work.
Right.
You don't know where your essay is going to turn out. Your essay might end up with you asking a lot more questions about your topic. And that's actually a really good place to end up on some things.
Sure, for sure. Awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you, Dr. Monty.
Well, thank you, Dr. Monty.
Thank you, too.